It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Hi, how we doing, everybody? Welcome to a 2 o'clock in the morning breaking news edition of Rico Brogna. How are you? I admit I am half asleep because I just drove all night to North Carolina. I pulled in, I brought all my bags in, brought all the family's bags in, and I see this very mysterious text message by Pete Hoffman. All Pete writes is, "Do you want a Rico first thing in the morning?" And I'm like, what the hell's he talking about? Rico about what? Like, what the hell are we Ricoing about? I just drove for 9 hours. I was listening to books on tape. Some very interesting books, by the way. Trying to keep my kids from fighting with each other, somehow getting through a 9-hour drive in the middle of the night. So I very quickly say, all right, I got to brace myself. What is this about? Did Pete Alonso come home? Did Pete Alonso go to Chicago? What the hell happened? And I decided to let John Heyman be the one to give me the information. And so I did see what you probably know, and that is the fact that Sean Manaea is coming back on a 3-year, $75 million contract. So I wrote back, Pete, I said, let's freaking Rico right now, because I still have energy after the car ride home, even though I'm half asleep. And I'm probably going to sleep till noon. So let's just talk about it right now. My first reaction is I'm happy, but I don't want to be done. That's my first reaction. My first reaction is I'm happy. I think the contract is great. I'm pleased with the contract. Only 3 years, considering he's coming off a great year and considering the insane market for starting pitchers. I think we had a worry that it was going to be 4 or 5 years. I think the money is even reasonable. I know $25 million a year sounds nuts, but all you got to do is look around and look at what starting pitchers are getting and look at what Manaea accomplished last year. And certainly the hope that he can build off of that wasn't just an anomaly. And I actually have more confidence in Manaea's season being legitimate and something he can build on than more so even Luis Severino and more so others. So I was pleased with the contract. I'm pleased he's back. But my first reaction was happy, but you can't let this be it. And there is a part of me that wonders, besides Sasaki, who obviously they're going to go after, will they still aggressively try to get Luis Castillo? Will they still talk about a guy like Walker Buehler? They were never in on Corbin Burns, so I don't get nuts about that. But I still want another arm. Because right now, when you look at what they have Sean Manaea, who I think you pencil in as the ace, either him or Kodai Senga, take your choice. Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, David Peterson, and then you've got the two, let's call it experiments, in Clay Holmes and Frankie Montas, and then you've got all the swing guys. But again, we know this is a team going with a 6-man rotation. I mean, David Stearns has already told that. So I wouldn't bow out on talking to a guy like Luis Castillo. We're talking to the Mariners, obviously, about trading for Luis Castillo. So my hope is, while I love the move, and it certainly fits David Stearns and not having to go too long in terms of a commitment to a starting pitcher, I don't want this to be it in terms of the rotation. Now, just a couple things about this contract. 3 years for him, I think, is as good as you were ever going to get considering the year he had last year. I think Manaea was probably angling for 5 years, and it wouldn't surprise me if it comes out that another team maybe gave him a 4-year offer. You could tell that Manaea had a major interest in coming back here. I remember early on in free agency, before Severino signed with the A's, there was talk about how aggressive they were in trying to get Sean Manaea. But I think the success that he had, the changes they made to his arm angle, especially after he was watching Chris Sale, the performances he had in the postseason. I know it didn't end well when you look at the conclusion of the NLCS against the Dodgers, but for the most part, he was a money pitcher. I think that's one of the lasting memories we have of him, is that he kind of felt like the ace at the very end. And he pitched like the ace at the very end of the season. So you got the sense that Manaea felt that. He felt the love from the New York crowd. Obviously, it was a very emotional year for him, that he wanted to come back. And that if the Mets were at least going to be in the ballpark with other offers that he was potentially getting, he was going to want to come back. And 3 years, $25 million a year. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of surprised. I figured based on what other pitchers were getting, over the course of free agency that you were probably going to have to give him 4 or 5 years. And I thought it was going to be in the high 20s, maybe even $30 million a year, as nuts as that sounds. But you're talking about a lefty. You're talking about a lefty that's had some good years in the major leagues. Like one thing about Manaea, when we were examining it during this offseason about getting reliability, Manaea in a weird way kind of fits the reliability card because 2021, he goes out and makes all 32 starts, pitches to a high 3 ERA, but still he goes out and makes every start. 2022 at San Diego, he makes 28 starts and made 2 appearances out of the bullpen. So for the most part, he was available. He wasn't great. Like he pitched to a 5 ERA. I'm certainly not defending his season, but he went out there and made every start. And then even 2023, the year he had with San Francisco, they used him out of the bullpen, but he still went out and made 27 starts. And then obviously this year with the Mets that he had, he makes 32 starts. So if you look at the last 4 years of his career, again, not the success that he had with the Mets this past season, he was certainly fitting the reliability factor, which this rotation desperately needed, which was the thing I wanted to see, especially when you have all those questions that are in this rotation. So I think Manaea probably gives more reliability than maybe we even realize. And he also gives you this hope that what Hefner and the pitching lab did with him last year was not a one-hit wonder. And they need him to not be a one-hit wonder. Let's be perfectly honest. They need what he did last year overall, a 3.5 ERA. You had Hoff basically saying he was a Cy Young contender latter part of the year, that he should get Cy Young votes. I don't think he ultimately did, but, I think he finished 11th. So I guess he did get some Cy Young votes. But that what he did in the second half of the season and what he did in the postseason is something he can build off of. And that this is the beginning of yet another left-hander who kind of hits the peak of his career into his mid-30s. And he's not even really into his mid-30s. He's going to turn 33 years old. So you're talking about a guy that's still, I don't want to say young, but he's not old by any stretch. You look at what Nate Eovaldi got. I mean, Nate Eovaldi got the same contract. Think about that. Nate Eovaldi got the same contract as Sean Manaea. And right now, at this point, I'm not talking about what they've accomplished. I'm saying this point in their career, who would you rather have on a 3-year deal? Manaea is 33 years old, so you have him for his age 33, his age 34, his age 35 season. It seems reasonable. So I love the contract. And now you look at the Met rotation, not just this year, but all these guys are locked in. Montas has an opt-out after year 1, so I guess Montas could be gone after 1 year, and I guess the hope he is, because it means he has a great year and he opts out. But Kodai is signed long-term. They have 2 more years of team control over David Peterson. Manaea is now locked in for 3 years. Holmes has at least 2 years before he has an opt-out. And then, of course, you hope, kind of like we did last year, that some young pitcher, maybe it's Brandon Sprout, maybe it's Blake Tidwell, who knows, steps up and becomes another guy in the rotation that you feel good about going into 2026. But that, by the way, is why I do think they're going to be done when it comes to the rotation. Because they've got 5 guys who are guaranteed rotation spots, right? Sean Manaea is obviously guaranteed a rotation spot. David Peterson, based on the way he pitched last year, guaranteed a rotation spot. Kodai Senga guaranteed a rotation spot. And Montas and Holmes are. I remember when Clay Holmes had his press conference when he was introduced, the thing that kind of bothered me is that nobody asked him point blank, hey, is it possible, based on the way this offseason goes, based on what happens in the spring training, that you go right to the bullpen, that this experiment of being a starter is short-lived? No one ever asked him that. Because right now, when you look at the way this offseason is playing out, let's just say Roki Sasaki picks the Mets. Let's just say, right? Sasaki picks the Mets. They brought Manaea back on a very reasonable contract. And who knows, maybe a trade for Luis Castillo does come through. Wouldn't it make sense with a team that's added nobody to their bullpen, but has added so many of these swing arms to have Clay Holmes pitch out of the bullpen? I guess I'll begin this discussion on December 23rd, moving Clay Holmes to the bullpen, because it's going to be a discussion throughout the season. But between us, I don't think the Mets are going to consider it. Like, they told Clay Holmes, you're in the rotation. So based on that, the Mets have 5 guaranteed starting pitchers right now, and then a whole host of swing guys to choose from. Blackburn, McGill, Budo, Griffin Canning. So right now you're up to 9 pitchers, 4 swing guys, and 5 guaranteed starters, and you're making a push for Sasaki. The thing about Sasaki, not that they would do this or he would want this, but if the Mets ever won that sweepstakes, they could always send him down to the minor leagues and let him develop, which, by the way, maybe a big market team does. And maybe, I assume he wouldn't want it. And when these discussions are going on and these meetings are taking place, you would think that him and his agent are asking, hey, am I in the rotation right away? Are you putting me in the minor leagues to develop because he's going to have options? But that's why, as much as I want, and maybe you want the Mets to add another starter, like trading for Castillo or trading for someone else, or forget Corbin Burns, not even linked to him, or adding another starter, I kind of doubt it. I think this is going to be the rotation. And to me, the formula is going to have to be this team's got to score a ton of runs. Can this rotation be average? Sure. It can be average. Manaea can build off of what he did last year. Senga's healthy. Peterson continues where he left off. That's a pretty good front three if all those ifs take place. And then, of course, you got the risks of Montas and Holmes and whoever the sixth starter is. Their identity is going to have to be scoring runs. And, of course, that leads us back to Pete Alonso. If you missed the podcast we did prior to the Manaea signing, we talked a lot about Pete's market and where things stand. Well, one thing changed since we did that podcast, and at least we dropped it on Sunday morning, and that's the fact that one of the potential Alonso suitors, because to me it's the Nationals and it's the Cubs that I would at least fear, and maybe there's another team I'm not even thinking about because you never know in free agency, the Nationals and the Cubs as threats for Alonso. The Nationals trade for Nathaniel Lowe from Texas, a guy we talked about as a potential backup for Pete Alonso. So not only is it the aspect of a team potentially going after Pete, now got a first baseman, but one of our backup plans, and all those backup plans are going away, by the way. I got a great email from a guy who said, I'll read it to you at the ricob@gmail.com, of course. He says, it's Anthony. He writes, I just had a chance to hear episode 399. By this time, every single Pete replacement is gone. I still love listening to it, but I have to laugh about how fast every Pete alternative disappeared. Tony, because he's right. I mean, everybody we talked about, they're all gone. I mean, I guess there's a few left, like the Nolan Arenado plan is still out there, or, you want to go get Anthony Rizzo, I guess he's still out there, or Josh Bell, but Naylor gets traded. Goldie goes to the Yankees. Carlos Santana goes back to Cleveland. And now Nathaniel Lowe goes to Washington. What about Texas, by the way, for Pete Alonso? Big market team. They shed Nathaniel Lowe. We've seen them spend a lot. We've also seen them steal legendary Mets before. I will not be calm about Pete until he resigns. So, yes, I agree. Signs point positively to the fact that the market is crashing on him and the Mets should be able to bring him back, just like they brought Sean Manaea back on a contract that seems very reasonable. But until it's done, until he's a Met, there is a little bit of fear, just a little bit of fear. But overall, I'm happy Manaea's back. I think this was a nice little surprise before Christmas. It's all coming together. First of all, Pete Hoffman deserves a lot of credit because without his text message at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd probably just go to sleep and never see this. How you feeling about the re-signing of Sean Manaea?
I'm excited about it because I think that he was someone that needed to come back. Again, fans have been very nervous about this rotation. I'm not saying that Sean Manaea is going to be winning the Cy Young this year, but at least it makes me feel more comfortable with the top of this rotation. I hear what you say about Clay Holmes. When is he going to get to the bullpen? I mean, I'd start that process now. He got paid already. What does it make a difference? Right?
Because they told him he's a starter. I doubt they're just going to, forget it. Offseason went a different way. You're going right to the bullpen.
Well, okay, but let's be serious here. You got Frankie. We've talked about the pitching lab, and I think you made a point of this in this morning's or Sunday morning's podcast, is that we're sitting here talking about the pitching lab like it's going to cure every single awful pitcher in baseball. Frankie Montas has a rough couple of years. Do we think it's automatically going to cure Frankie Montas? No. So he may have to go to the minors here or there, or he might have to get called. Like there's a possibility some of these guys that they bring in are not going to pitch in this rotation right away.
Yeah, It's interesting. I think Clay Holmes has a chance to be successful. So when we talk about Holmes going to the bullpen on December 23rd, it's not because I don't believe in the Mets turning him into a quality starting pitcher. It's more, and I mentioned this early on in this offseason, depending on the way the offseason goes, depending on who they acquire, depending on who they don't acquire, may change the need of a Jose Budo or change the need in this case of a guy like Clay Holmes. So it's not thinking he can't be a good starter. It's more they haven't added a bullpen arm. And when you look at their bullpen going into next year, okay, Reed Garrett, okay, Dednell Nunez, okay, they signed Genesis Cabrera. I don't want to forget him. But they have more options to start and intriguing options to start than they do kind of that lockdown bullpen arm. So I think the Mets are going to give Clay every opportunity to be an effective starting pitcher. What I don't know is at what point, if their bullpen is struggling, would they pull the plug? But here's the other thing about this team as we get closer to seeing what this roster is. And it's very similar to last year. They're going to have to score runs. Their identity is going to be maybe being a top 2, top 3 offense in the National League because this pitching staff can be good, can be decent. I think the pitching staff certainly turned out to be decent last year, which defied a lot of odds. But their identity is not going to be what 10 years ago was. We're going to celebrate 10 years of the New York Mets going to the World Series in 2015. It ain't going to be that team. If anything, it's going to be similar to the 2006 team where they just have to pound you. They got to score a lot of runs. And a part of that process is bringing Pete Alonso back.
Well, listen, bring Pete Alonso back, sign Alex Bregman to play second base. and here's the thing is, for anybody, and this is the one thing that's been bothering me, Ev, keep on hearing this over and over, and it's not just the Mets, other teams too. It's like, well, Vlad Guerrero's going to be available next year. I don't care about next year. What about this year? Don't we want to win now? You bring in Pete Alonso. Worst comes to worst, you still make a move for Vlad Guerrero next year. They could play DH.
It's not even what you're saying, which is, hey, that's a year from now or a few months from now if he's traded. It's the fact that if Pete Alonso is going to have to settle, and it looks like he is going to have to settle for a contract that he probably didn't think was possible a few months ago based on this first base market. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. may be a better player than Pete Alonso. He's not double the player of Pete Alonso. So when you talk about value of a contract, if Pete Alonso has to settle for, let's say, a 4-year, $100 million deal, and I don't know if that's ultimately what it is. Maybe he prefers something short-term so he can opt out and kind of check out the market a year from now. So I don't know what this contract is, but I can tell you it's not going to be anywhere close to what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to get next year. He's going to get like $300 million. And as good as he is, as exciting as he is, he's not double the player of Pete Alonso. So it's not just waiting a year. It's the idea that you're willing to give him 5 or 6 more years than Pete, $10 or $15 million more than Pete. Like, I like Vlad. I don't think he's that much better than Pete Alonso. What I'm hoping for is this thing's going to develop quick because first base is flying off the board. So does Scott Boras dig his feet in, or does he say, all right, let me go make a deal?
Well, there's 2 things. First of all, Vlad, I think I heard he wants $500 to $600 million.
Yeah.
So with $300 million, $500 to $600 million, we're a little bit off there. But that being said, too, you mentioned something that does scare me. The Texas Rangers just traded Nathaniel Lowe. I saw him, I think it was last year, where he played in Texas and had a fantastic series. I'd be nervous about them more than the Cubs to try to grab Pete Alonso.
Yeah, no, I think Texas is a team to keep an eye on. I think the Cubs, the Texas Rangers, and maybe somebody else we're not even thinking about. But overall, Met fans, good day. Manaea's back, 3 years, $75 million deal, very reasonable contract. We now have ourselves at least a rotation, and hopefully, David Stearns is not done yet. We appreciate you checking us out, whether it's live at 2 o'clock in the morning or you downloaded us on your commute or your trip, your family vacation. But we always tell you, when there's breaking news, we will do our best to give you instant reactions. And in this case, a little 2 a.m. from North Carolina instant reaction on the Rico Brogna. Remember, download, subscribe so you never miss a live Rico. And I remind you, Wednesday night, the debut of our 3-part series counting down the greatest home runs in the history of the New York Mets. Thank you very much for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.